Hi, I'm Caitlin MacBride, and we're here in Catskill, New York at the studio of Julia Weist, and we are actually studio neighbors, and we are going to be talking about her work today. Her work is in the permanent collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, the Brooklyn Museum, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Jewish Museum, and the MIT List Visual Arts Center. So we are in your studio here in Catskill. Can you tell me a bit about where we are and what this building, what this space is?
Yeah, so we're actually in like a studio complex here. There's 30, 31 something other artist studios here, and you are here too. Our studios are just down the hallway from each other, and there's some other amazing artists literally right outside the door. There is a sort of similar spontaneity of running into people in the hallway that you don't typically get in this sort of more country setting outside of like an urban center.
Yeah, I remember when I was first moving into the studio here, like meeting you and talking about your work and being so psyched to have other really awesome artist friends up here. It's nice and like this little upstate enclave. So I know that you just had a show at Rachel Uffner Gallery and that a lot of the work was about the government's relationship to artists and the modes of surveillance and control that they use. Could you tell me some more about some of that work?
Yes. It started when I found this really amazing archival collection in Albany, New York, which is where the state archives for New York reside. And you can see here this wallpaper that I made to create an installation. I found all of these memos from a department called the Motion Picture Division. And from 1921 to 1965, this government agency was responsible for viewing any film that was to be screened in a movie theater in the state of New York and making sure by their standards that there was no content that they deemed immoral, inhumane, sacrilegious. What I was able to do was find the memos that referenced these films. And then I spent about 6 months trying to locate as many of these at-issue scenes as I possibly could. These are, for example, scenes within a film where a woman is breastfeeding or where a gender nonconforming character is dressed in a way that was deemed to be outside of the norms, or women drinking alcohol during Prohibition. Now, male characters could drink alcohol, but women could not. So I noticed very quickly that there was this very gendered censorship happening. And I thought, okay, maybe if I can find all of these scenes, I can stitch them together and I can make a sort of supercut of taboo in the 20th century. So I made this supercut film. It was about 17 minutes long. I submitted to today's Motion Picture Association of America because today we don't have government censor boards. We have this industry agency that determines if films are appropriate for certain audiences. So the MPA, as they're called, gave it an R rating. They give a reason for the rating, and the reason was the graphic childbirth. It's just a straightforward birth scene.
And who comprises the MPA?
Okay, so it's a great question. They're anonymous. I only knew them as rater 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The raters are supposed to represent an average American parent. What the fuck is an average American parent is a very open question. Beyond just providing the rating, they have oversight over a lot of content surrounding the film. It's sort of anything that you put in the world that in either still or moving image represents the film that someone is going to see. They review it and approve or deny it. So that includes movie posters. And I thought, oh, this is so interesting. I'm sure they won't deny any of my posters, but I will make them. I'm an artist. I make things. These 3 posters that I'm about to show you were all disapproved by the Motion Picture Association, meaning that I can't use these at all in public to circulate or promote the film. And if I do choose to do that, which, spoiler alert, I have chosen to do that, there's a whole suite of punishments that they outline as part of the rating process. And I just was so surprised, which is why I did choose to make them public and to share in exhibitions and when I premiere it, they'll obviously be included in that process because they're just so innocuous from my perspective. I was legitimately shocked. So maybe this is the least innocuous in the sense that there is a shot of a woman doing a vaginal birth, but I did choose the frame where the doctor's hand is obscuring her genitalia. And so in the memos that they provided to explain their rationale about why it was restricted, they said that it was heavily implied genital nudity. So I don't know how you have a baby without implied genital nudity, but that was their distinction. This poster was also rejected. It shows women breastfeeding and it shows pregnant women. They consider the breastfeeding nudity. This one was rejected because presumably this is a marijuana joint, although it looks like it could certainly be a hand-rolled cigarette. Even though where the film was made, the subject of the film and where the film will be shown, which is all New York, at least the impetus of the project is a state where marijuana is not illegal. And then the final poster I'll show you here is about abortion. And interestingly enough, this poster was approved. So technically I am allowed to use this and make this public. But the fascinating thing that happened here was I actually tried to use this poster for what it was meant to be, which is promotion for the film. And I tried to take out an ad in a newspaper in Albany, the largest print circulation newspaper of the Albany area. And the newspaper rejected the poster because it dealt with abortion.
So I know a few years ago you did a residency that was like with the municipality of New York. What was that called again?
Yeah, it's called the PAIR program. So it stands for Public Artists in Residence, and it's an initiative of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs.
Cool.
Yeah.
And so with that, you did a lot of work around artists and like government surveillance of artists. And I know this piece came out of that group, but could you tell us a bit about this?
Yes. So I was in residence for a year at the Municipal Archives in New York City. So you can see the Department of Records and Information Services. And it was this really unique opportunity to do research that would have been very difficult to do otherwise. So in this piece, there are various examples of times when New York City government has surveilled artists when they were either directly protesting or simply doing their work, because at different moments they were identified as subversive. So we have everything from Jonas Mekas's mugshot, with this really fascinating note-taking from the undercover agents who were assigned to go to his film screening and determine if it was obscene, in which case they could arrest him. But what happens is in the notes of the undercover officers, they're essentially becoming film critics. And a parallel to additional notes from actually a similar time period in the late 1960s, from New York City police officers who were part of an agency that has now been disbanded because it was a clear constitutional violation. And these officers went plainclothes and went undercover to infiltrate the Art Workers Coalition. So when AWC was protesting and demonstrating around broader labor rights for artists, free access to museums for the public, they did protests at MoMA. And one of the things that I learned looking at these recently unsealed government documents was that NYPD officers were attempting to participate in those activities. So this piece is an edition of 3, but the second print of the edition was acquired by MoMA. And through that process, I was able to work with the curators at the Department of Media and Performance to figure out how we can, through the process of acquisition, highlight the dynamic of the fact that it's the institution where some of this took place, acquiring the work. In the MoMA acquisition process, we used a system that's in place that all acquisitions go through, which is a copyright agreement, so they can use images of the artwork that they've acquired. And as a condition of signing that off for MoMA, we added a term. And the term was that the museum would make the best faith effort that they can to always include an extended wall label accompanying this piece that identified the role of the NYPD on site at MoMA during these protests, specifically with this undercover activity.
So I'm curious what you've been working on since the show at Uffner. What's your latest project that you're working on?
we're sitting in front of my murder wall for this new project. A lot of this work, this new project, is coming out of this way that I have explained my practice to folks who are like, sometimes I've used a shorthand along the lines of, it's like I'm an investigative journalist, but instead of coming out as an article, it comes out as an artwork.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking about what that really means. So I thought about this category that is not accessible to the public, but is accessible to certain people. And this is like restricted information that like law enforcement has access to. And this one special category of people also has access, which is private investigators. So private investigators are typically licensed by the state in which they work. And you have to prove to the state that basically they can trust you with this information. And then you get a license and you can access it. And so I looked into New York State. What does it take to become a private investigator? And the criteria was 3 years of full-time investigations. And I thought, I've been doing investigations for 3 years, but within that, of course, there's all sorts of sub-criteria that you need to prove.
Oh, okay.
So I thought, I'm going to go ahead and apply. And in looking into it, it seemed very clear that I would apply with like the paper-based application and I would definitely be rejected. However, there is a system set up for these like more nuanced cases, which is once you're rejected, you have a hearing with an administrative judge with the Department of State, where you can essentially present your case. And in that context, I can show that these 5 things that I need to prove are in fact integral to my practice, and I should be considered in this bucket of people who do investigations for a living.
Yeah, and then you'll have like a whole new series of documents of why they turn you down.
Exactly.
And so what are the 5 different categories?
First off, that your work, the nature of the work itself is investigative based on their definition. And their definition is so broad that I think it actually applies to like far more artists than just me. But the others fall into categories that are more legible to the state because it's related to essentially how work is organized in our country. You also have to show that investigations are your primary duties.
Yeah.
So in the case of an artist, they might say, okay, so yeah, research and investigations are crucial to what you do, but also then you spend 20% of your time writing emails, 20% of your time taking photographs, making sculptures, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I'm in the process of making new artworks that can serve as evidence, proving all of these things that they're asking me to prove. I think that there's pretty high stakes here because, for example, investigative journalists are not approved for this license. I think when people bring creativity and expression into that context, it feels maybe more destable.
It's interesting because like looking at it too, I'm thinking about how your work is so closely tied to politics in a way. Like you've got Antonio Delgado, who represents us up here, right here. I was very excited when he came by our studio for a visit with you. And I know you also recently had a visit with Bill de Blasio, which seems very exciting.
He came actually to the gallery. There was a piece that I made about Bill de Blasio, his relationship to the history of arts funding in New York, Rudy Giuliani before him, how he tried to defund arts in New York. But I found this kind of connective tissue between them.
So did Bill have any good art feedback?
He did. He gave me some critique. We basically had a critique, which was amazing.
Did he have any intel on like government records and things like that?
So he did, and he sort of gave me this Easter egg, which I'm excited to pursue in the future.
So on the ending note, I just wanted to ask you what kind of shows you're watching these days. What TV are you watching?
Okay, so I'm watching this show called Alone. Basically, Alone is somewhat like a typical like survival reality TV show, but much more extreme. Like they drop them in, next to a glacial lake for like 150 days with like 10 items they have to survive. But what I think, there's 2 things I think they're really interesting about it. One is I get really into like watching the world building. Like I love seeing how people make structures, and some of them have like academic backgrounds and they're like, I'm making a pit house because it's been used for millennia.
Oh, wow.
It uses the heat. It's like there's a lot of like, I feel like I'm learning how to survive our upcoming apocalypse.
Yeah, for the end times. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the conversation.